Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Vividex. On this, now we will start the book How to Get Rich, written by Donald Trump, President of USA. So let's start. Trump, How to Get Rich, Donald J. Trump, with Meredith McClover. To my parents, Mary and Fred Trump, the mother of all advice. Trust in God and be true to yourself. Mary Trump, my mother. When I look back, that was great advice, concise and wise at once. I didn't really get it at first, but because it sounded good, I stuck to it. Later I realized how comprehensive this is and how to keep your bases covered while thinking about the big picture. It's good advice no matter what your business or lifestyle. Introduction. 5 billion reasons why you should read this book. A lot has happened to us since 1987. That's the year The Art of the Deal was published and became the best selling business book of the decade, with over 3 million copies in print. Business Rule #1. If you don't tell people about your success, they probably won't know about it. A few months ago, I picked up The Art of the Deal, skimmed a bit, and then read the first page and last paragraphs. I realized that after 17 years, they still rang true. I could have written these words yesterday. First paragraph. I don't do it for the money. I have got enough, much more than I will ever need. I do it to do it. Deals are my art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals, preferably big deals. That's how I get my kicks. Last paragraph. Don't get me wrong, I also plan to keep making deals, big deals, and right round the clock. It's now 2004. I'm still making deals round the clock, and I still don't do it for the money. I don't think you should do it for the money either. Money is not an end in itself, but it's sometimes the most effective way to help realize our dreams. So if you have got big dreams and you are looking for a way to make them happen, this book is for you. How to get rich. That's what I decided to call it, because whenever I meet people, that's usually what they want to know from me. You ask a baker how he makes bread. You ask a billionaire how he makes money. Sure, there have been countless how to get rich books written by millionaires. Billionaire authors are harder to find. Billionaire authors with interests in real estate, gaming, sports, and entertainment are rarer still. And billionaire authors with their own Manhattan skyscrapers and hit primetime TV series are the rarest of all. I'm pretty sure I am the only one, though Oprah could give me a run for the money if she ever decides to write another book and get into real estate. Business Rule 2. Keep it short, fast, and direct. The following pages will be straightforward and succinct, but don't tell the brevity of these pages prevent you from savoring the profundity of the advice you are about to receive. These stories and words of wisdom have been distilled from almost 30 years at the top. So here it comes, the scoop from the Donald. After you make your first billion, don't forget to send me a thank you note. You know the address. You know the address. The Donald J. Trump School of Business and Management. In Art of the Deal, I mentioned my nemesis and mentor at New York Military Academy, Theodore Tobias here on my left, Major General John Brugh Manis on my right. Be a general. I am the chairman and president of the Trump Organization. I like saying that because it means a great deal to me. There are almost 20,000 members of this organization at this point. I did a print ad once in which I declared, I only work with the best. That statement still stands. More and more, I see that running a business is like being a general. Calling the shots carries a great deal of responsibility, not only for yourself but for your troops. Your employees' lives to a large extent are dependent on you and your decisions. Bad strategy can end up affecting a lot of people. This is where being a leader takes on a new dimension. Every decision you make is an important one, whether there are 20,000 people working for you or just one. If you are careful when finding employees, management becomes a lot easier. I rely on a few key people to keep me informed. They know I trust them and they do their best to keep that trust intact. For example, when I need to know something about my casinos and hotels in Atlantic City, I know I can call up Mark Brown, my CEO, and get a fast and informed answer. If I call Laura Cordovano over at Trump Park Avenue and ask about sales, she will give it to me exactly as it is. If I call Alan Wieselberg, my CFO, he'll tell me what I need to know in 20 words or less. My senior counsel and apprentice advisor, George Ross, can do it in 10 words or less. Find people who suit your business style and you will have fewer problems to deal with as time goes on. Good people equals good management and good management equals good people. They have to work together or they won't work together for very long. I have seen good management get by with mediocre people, and I have also seen excellent people get stuck in the mires of bad management. The good managers will eventually leave, followed by the good workers, and you will be left with a team that gets along because they are all mediocre. Save yourself time by getting the best people you can. Sometimes this can mean choosing attitude over experience and credentials. Use your creativity to come up with a good mix. Creative people rarely need to be motivated. They have their own inner drive that refuses to be bored. They refuse to be complacent. They live on the edge, which is precisely what is needed to be successful and remain successful. One of my former employees was in charge of a new project. He had done a thorough and acceptable job, but I felt that something was missing. It wasn't fantastic, which knowing his capabilities it should have been. I decided to challenge his creative ego by mentioning that it was fine but seemed a little lack inspiration. I politely asked him whether he was genuinely interested in the project and suggested that perhaps that might be the problem. Well, the guy went ballistic on me. He was deeply insulted, and as you can probably guess, the revision he turned in was terrific. The difference between the first draft and the final version was incredible. I didn't slam the guy because he was usually demanding of himself and had never let me down, but I had to give him a jolt. Generals motivate their soldiers. They inspire them when it is necessary. They do the same for their highest ranking officers. We all need a boost now and then. Learn how to tailor your method to the personality you are managing. Keep the big picture in mind while attending to the daily details. This can seem like a balancing act because it is absolutely necessary for success in running a company. Stay focused. In the 1980s, I was riding high. After learning the essentials of real estate development from my father, Fred, a builder in Queens and Brooklyn, I would become a major player in Manhattan, developing Trump Tower, the Grand Hyatt Hotel, and many other top tier properties. I had a yacht, a plane, a best selling book. One magazine headline said, "Everything he touches turns to gold," and I believed it. I would never known adversity. I went straight from Wharton to wealth. Even in down markets, I bought properties inexpensively and had made a lot of money. I began to think it was easy. In the late 80s, I lost focus. I would fly off to Europe to attend fashion shows and I wasn't looking at the clothing. My lack of attention was killing my business. Then the real estate market crashed. I owed billions upon billions of dollars. $9.2 billion to be exact. That's 9,200,000,000 dollars. I have told this story many times before, but it bears repeating. In the midst of the crash, I passed a beggar on the street and realized he was worth $9.2 billion more than I was. I saw a lot of my friends go bankrupt, never to be heard from again. The media had me for lunch. Forbes, Business Week, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they all published major stories about my crisis, and a lot of people seemed to be happy about it. I will never forget the worst moment. It was 3 am. Citibank phoned me at my home in Trump Tower. They wanted me to come over to their office immediately to negotiate new terms with some foreign banks. 3 of the 99 banks to whom I owed billions. It's tough when you have to tell a banker that you can't pay interest. They tend not to like these words, and Ali at Citibank suggested that the best way for me to handle this difficult situation was to call the banks myself, and that's exactly what they wanted me to do at 3 o'clock on a cold January morning in the freezing rain. There was no cabs, so I walked 15 blocks to Citibank. By the time I got there, I was drenched. That was the low point. There were 30 bankers sitting around a big table. I phoned one Japanese banker and then an Austrian banker and then a third banker from the country I can no longer remember. In The Art of the Deal, I had warned readers never to personally guarantee anything. Well, I hadn't followed my own advice. Of the $9.2 billion I owed, I would personally guaranteed $1 billion. I was a shakmak, but I was a lucky schmuck, and I wound up dealing with some understanding bankers who worked out a fair deal. After being the king of the 80s, I survived like the early 90s, and by the mid to late 90s, I was thriving again. But I learned my lesson. I worked as hard today as I did when I was a young developer in the 1970s. Don't make the mistake I did. Stay focused. Maintain your momentum. William Levitt, the master builder of Levittown, taught me the true meaning of momentum. In the 1950s, he was the king. No detail was too small for his attention. He would personally collect stray nails and extra chips of wood from building sites to make sure his construction crews used all available material. He sold his company in 1956 to ITT for $100 million, which is equivalent to billions today. Then he made some terrible mistakes. He retired. He married the wrong woman. He moved to the south of France and lived on the Riviera with his new boat and his new wife. One day, ITT called. The executives in charge of the conglomerate had no aptitude for home building. They had sought huge tracts of land but did not know how to get them zoned. So they sold it back to Levitt, who thought he would gotten a great deal. He went back into business and he proceeded to go bankrupt. I saw William Levitt at a cocktail party in 1994. 2 weeks before he died. He was standing by himself in a corner, looking defeated. I didn't know him well, but I approached him, hoping to acquire some wisdom from the master. Mr. Levitt, I said, how are you doing? Not good, Donald, not good. Then he said the word I'll never forget. I lost my momentum. I was out of the world for 20 years. I came back and I wasn't the same. No matter how accomplished you are, no matter how well you think you know your business, you have to remain vigilant about the details of your field. If you can't get by on experience or smarts, even the best surgeons need to be trained regularly to stay current on the latest research and procedures. No matter what you are managing, don't assume you can glide by. Momentum is something you have to work at to maintain. My loyal assistant Noma Foyderer. Get a great assistant. Surround yourself with people you can trust. I often say it's good to be paranoid, but not when it comes to your home team. Ask God for a great assistant, no joke. A great one can make your life a whole lot easier, or in my case, almost manageable. Norma Foederer has been with me for 23 years. If you want to know what a great guy I am, just ask her, but not on a Friday. Handling me the office and several hundred calls a week isn't easy. She is as tough and smart as she is gracious. She is also indefatigable, which helps a lot if you work for me. My phones are so busy that I require two executive assistants and they never stop. They alone handle on the average more than 1250 calls a week. They not only they are not only efficient and fast but also very pleasant and beautiful young women. You don't have to be beautiful to work for me, just be good at your job. I have been accused of admiring beautiful women. I plead guilty. But when it comes to the workplace, anyone who is beautiful had better had better have brains too. You need competent people with an inherent work ethic. I am not a complacent person and I can't have a complacent staff. I move forward quickly, so they must. Once I wanted to know how fast a new company could work, so I told him I was leaving in 15 minutes and needed something done within that time. I wasn't actually going anywhere, but sure enough, I had what I needed in 15 minutes. Machiavellian? Maybe, but both of us learned something that day. One final piece of advice on assistants, which I learned from experience and which I admit may not be as relevant to your career as it's been to mine. Find a receptionist who can speak English. We had a breathtaking European beauty out front who could easily rival Ingrid Bergman in her heyday. But I discovered that her ability to recognize well-known people in the United States was limited to myself and maybe President Bush. She wasn't so familiar with the likes of Hugh Grant, Reggie Jackson, George Steinbrenner, Jack Welch, Paul Anka, Muhammad Al Fayyad, Regis Philbin, or Tony Bennett. Their calls never got through to me, and their names were placed on her psycho list. But you should have seen her. What a knockout. She has since moved on to better career opportunities, but we will never forget her. Neither will anyone who ever called in or tried to. Remember, the buck starts here. Set the standard. Don't expect your employees to work harder than you do. In my case, I don't have to worry about that because I work 7 days a week and love almost every minute of it. But also realize that your company will sometimes function as an extended or dysfunctional family. It's only original considering that people often spend more waking hours with co-workers than they do with their families. A visitor in my office once mentioned that the goings on there reminded him of a family fight in progress. I will admit that the volume level gets high now and then, and he wasn't far off in his assessment. But if you want smooth sailing every day, move to the Mediterranean. Winners see problems as just another way to prove themselves. Problems are never truly hardships to them, and if you haven't got any problems, then you must not have a business to run. Regard your company as a living, breathing organism because that's what it is. Those figures you see on your spreadsheets will reflect the health of that organism. Watch out for bad cells while allowing good cells to flourish. Growth is an indication of life, so keep your organization moving forwards at all times. Having a passion for what you do is crucial. If you can't get excited about what you are doing, how can you expect anyone else to? If your employees can see and feel your energy, it is bound to affect them. Don't intimidate people. If you do, you will never get a straight answer from anyone and you will be defeating your own purpose. I keep my door open and my people know I am available as well as approachable. We don't have chat fasts, but whatever needs to be done gets accomplished and quickly. Remember that your organization is your organization. That sounds simplistic, but bottom line, it's your ball game. The strategy is up to you, and so are the results. Remember Harry Truman's famous words, which he kept on his desk in the Oval Office. The buck stops here. I keep a similar quote on my desk. It reads, "The buck starts here." Don't equivocate. If you equivocate, it's an indication that you are unsure of yourself and what you are doing. It's also what politicians do all the time, and I find it inappropriate, insulting, and condescending. I try not to do it. Fortunately, I don't have to try too hard at this one because I have been known to be on the blunt and fast side at times, which is good. I once asked an executive in my organization to give me a synopsis of a new development we were considering. He had been to the city in question, had spent some time there, and had done some careful investigating. He went on to describe the merits of the site, the pitfalls, the good things, the bad things, the pros, the cons, on in great detail. He must have talked for 10 minutes straight. Judging from what he was telling me, there were just as many reasons to drop the project as there were reasons to jump right in and get going. It was like a tight game with no overtime. I asked him more questions and he ended up exactly where we were before. He was on the both sides of the fence at once and didn't seem to want to take a stand either way. This guy had a lot of experience, a good track record. So finally I asked him what he thought of the project in 10 words or less. "It stinks," he said. He had 8 words left, but he didn't need them. Ask yourself 2 questions. Is there anyone else who you can who can do this better than I can? That's just another way of saying know yourself and know your competition. If your competition is better than you are, you need to offer some quality they lack. What am I pretending not to see? We can get swept up in euphoria of creative movement, or what former President Richard Nixon's speechwriters used to tell, the lift of a dream. Before the dream lifts you into the clouds, make sure you have looked hard at the facts on the ground. Bullshit will only get you so far. I think it's funny that the phrase most closely associated with me these days is "you are fired," because the truth is, although I have had to fire people from time to time, it's not a big part of my job. I much prefer keeping loyal and hardworking people around for as long as they would like to be here. There is a wonderful lady in her 90s, Amy Lewison, who worked for my father and still reports to work every day at our Brooklyn office. Here at the Trump organization, Helen Rakoz has worked for me from the day I moved to Manhattan, and she still puts in long hours every week. She is 82. Once I delayed firing someone for 2 years because this guy always had such a line of bullshit every time I came close to the topic. No matter what was going on, he had some huge deal lined up that was just about to come through. He managed to string me along for 2 solid years, and I believed him every time, or wanted to. Finally, I was forced to realize that his claims were bogus, but I gave him every chance before finally axing him. Unless your boss is a total sadist, he or she doesn't want to fire you or cause hardship to your family. If you think you are in danger of being fired, take control of the situation and ask your boss for a meeting. Make sure you ask for a meeting at the right time. Tell your boss to want to make sure you are communicating and doing your job to everyone's satisfaction. Of course, if your boss is a sadist or just a lousy communicator, you have still got a problem. In that case, fire your boss and get a better job. There is no sense in trying to cope up with a bad situation that will never improve. I never try to dissuade people from quitting. If they don't want to be here, I don't want them to be here either. No one has ever come to me with an ultimatum. People see how it works and here. If it doesn't suit them, they move on. Sometimes it happens quickly. A qualified and experienced receptionist worked here for a grand total of 6 hours. She realized right away that the pace just wasn't suited to her, and she very politely told us so and left. I appreciated her quick thinking and efficient decision making skills. She will have a successful career somewhere else. Every new hire is a gamble. Some people give such great interviews that you are ready to make them vice presidents on the spot. until you realize that their true talent is simply giving a great interview. That's why, in a sense, every new hire is a gamble. Impressive credentials don't always add up to the great performance or a good fit. Non existent credentials don't necessarily mean a no talent. Being circumspect helps a lot and keeps you from being surprised. People can offer an interesting mix of pros and cons. Time will do the weeding out for you. All you have to do is pay attention. What I look for in employees is a sense of responsibility that goes beyond which merely sufficient. Some people do the bare minimum, and some people will actually be concerned about the organization as a whole. They see themselves as having a direct relationship to the success or the failure of the company they work for. They believe they are important and their work shows it. If you can still instill this sense of worth in your employees, you will have a tip top team working for you. People who take the pride in their work are the kind you want to have around, and the kind I like to keep around. I especially like employees who spend and, more important, save the company's money as if it were their own. Companies suffer when employees don't make enough of an effort to control costs. The employees who feel a personal responsibility for their budgets, who view company's bottom line as an extension of their own personal savings account, are often the ones who get the best results. If you let your boss know that you are watching out for his and her bottom line, you will always be appreciated. I respect employees who can think on their feet. So does George Ross, my senior counsel. His assistant Carol Barkowitz was helping out at the front desk one day when she received a call from a stranger who said she was about to commit suicide. Carol deemed the call credible and took a few moments to listen to the distressed woman. Carol asked her where she was from, and the woman replied that she lived in South California, not far from the beach. Carol responded, "You live in California? Near the beach? Do you know how cold it is in New York today? It's 8 degrees outside, and that's what without the wind chill. I almost froze just getting to work. If I were you, I would go out right now, take a long walk on the beach, and sit in the sun for a while. That's what I would do if I were you." The woman instantly calmed down and thanked Carol for being so nice to her. That's the kind of person we like to have around. A certain amount of personal ambition is necessary, but not to the point where it undermines the common goal of the company. If your group can't work together, you won't accomplish much. I don't like backstabbing. It's not necessary, and it's insulting to me. I have eyes and ears and instincts too. I can assess people and situations for myself. If people have time to be petty, it's an indication they are not busy enough with their work. You can't expect to be valuable employee if you don't make yourself valuable. Think about it. What do you contribute to the welfare of the organization? Are you instrumental in keeping it humming and moving forward? Do you work wholeheartedly or half-heartedly? Are you just going through the motions and hoping no one will notice? The only person you ever fool is yourself. You can't fool others, even though you might think you can. A lot of people say they are going through the motions because their position isn't challenging or rewarding and there is no room to grow. It's a dead end situation. That might very well be. If so, look elsewhere for a company that could offer you a promotion in your particular area of interest or expertise. There are times when you should move on and situations in which the only way up is out. Ideas are welcome, but make sure you have the right one. If you run a company, make yourself accessible to your employees. If they feel they can bring ideas to you, they will. If they feel they can't, they won't. You might miss out a lot of good ideas, and pretty soon you might be missing a lot of employees. I allow people to run their ideas by me. I don't have a lot of time, so they have to be prepared and succinct. I'm sure that's the protocol of any busy CEO. So if you are going to be bold enough to present your idea, make it as clear as possible and don't take it casually. Think of it as a presentation that could cost you a lot of money if you were to lose the client. Your boss time is important, and if you won't win any points by wasting it. Learn to recognize the fine line between being pushy and being intelligently assertive. It can be an issue of timing. Pay attention to what's happening around you and pace yourself according to that rhythm. I try to develop a tempo when I am working. Someone who interrupts it is not going to receive a warm welcome. Also remember this, the boss has the big picture, you don't. So if your idea doesn't meet with hurrahs, it could very well be that a similar idea is already in development or that your idea is not in step with plans that have already been made. It shouldn't discourage you because your initiative will always be noticed. But recognize when not to press an issue and don't expect a lengthy explanation of why. I like people who don't give up, but merely being a pest is detrimental to everyone. Once again, fine tune your discernment. Know when to ease up. Keep your antennae up for another idea and move appropriate opportunity. Sometimes we hesitate with good reason. There was one former employee who I liked a lot, but he reminded me of a jumping bean. He couldn't keep still for more than 3 seconds at a time. Even riding in the car with him became an ordeal because being in an enclosed space seemed to warm him even more. Then he would really get going. I finally learned to avoid him as much as possible, and that's too bad because he was a great guy. But enough is enough. Too much will cause people to tune you out or wish that you would move to another state. Last I heard, the jumping bean was living in Montana. I only hope they have enough space there to contain him, and every time I hear about UFO sightings in Montana, I have to laugh. I know who it is. One last thing, if your boss says no to an idea, pay attention. Most likely there is a good reason. No one disregards a terrific idea. It just might not be the right terrific idea for the company you are with. Maybe you are meant to go off on your own as an entrepreneur. Let that be an indication to you. It could be the beginning of your career rather than the end of it. Focus on the talent instead of the title. People who work for me know there's a lot more to me than my public persona. I'm not one dimensional, and if you realize that the people around you aren't either, you will be utilizing the hidden potential that just about everyone has. Whether they want to use it or not is up to them to a certain extent, but it's also up to a leader to recognize it or at least to give it a chance to unfold. Most people don't like to stagnate. If you want to keep your company moving forward, look around you now and then for fresh possibilities within your organization. Never let someone's job title be the sole indication of their worth. People at the Trump organization have transcended their positions on many occasions. Matthew Calamari, the executive vice president of operations, started as a security guard. After getting to know Matthew, I realized he had a lot more to offer than his job title warranted, and he has proven me right. He is a dedicated, trustworthy worker, and any CFO in his right mind would want to have him around. As an executive VP, he is in charge of building operations and runs my entire security organization. He is in charge of my major building projects with his brother Michelle and Andy Weiss. Their most notable recent accomplishment is the new building on the site of the former Delmonico Hotel at Park Avenue and 559th Street. I'm calling it Trump Park Avenue. Catchy, right? Vinny Stalio, who was hired by Matthew Calamari, started as my bodyguard and is now a vice president. He has just what it takes to be an effective executive, which was clear to me, if not immediately to him. Vinny would often drive executives, architects, and contractors up to the Westchester to look at developments I was building. Now they report to him. I am perhaps the largest owner of the land in Westchester County, and now it's the Vinny who keeps his eye on it all. With Matthew Calamari, an executive vice president at the Trump organization. John Tortulo, president of Trump Model Management, our modeling agency, started as a booker and now has what many guys would consider a dream job. Meredith McKeever, who had made the writing of this book a pleasure instead of a headache, started out as a media assistant. I recognized that her talents encompassed much more. Of course, it takes talent to deal with me and everyone else every day, but especially me. I could have hired an outsider collaborator to help me with this book, but why I spend time looking outside the organization when you have all the people you need right beside you? Very often, your resources are greater than you might think. I don't like it when people underestimate me, and I try not to underestimate anyone else either. People are multifaceted, and it's important to let them function in a way that will allow them to shine. Most people would rather succeed than fail, but sometimes the leader has to be the catalyst for the putting success into their personal vocabulary. In other words, try to see beyond a person's title. You can find talent in unlikely places. Meredith McKeever, Rohana Graf, and Norma Forderer of the Trump Organization. Manage the person, not the job. I once heard a story about a guy who owned an advertising agency. There was one writer who drove the other writers crazy because he would appear to be doing nothing in his office. He made no attempts to look busy. Finally, his colleagues complained to his boss about his laziness. The boss suddenly perked up and asked, "How long has he been this way?" One of the writers answered, "4 weeks and weeks." He sits there and does zip. He's like, it's like he's in coma. The boss said, "I want all of you to be quiet and not to disturb him. And every now and then I ask if you can get him some coffee or some lunch or run some errands for him." Needless to say, the employees were deflated and he started grumbling. Then the boss explained his rationale. "Listen, the last time he was acting this way and the time before that he came up with the ideas worth many millions of dollars. So when I tell you not to disturb him, I have a reason for it." People have different ways of achieving results. I enjoy figuring out how each of my key employees excels. If people are your resource, you would better try to learn something useful about them. Being able to do so is what makes a good manager a great one. Some people respond well to the fear factor. Ever hear ever hear this exchange? Question: How long have you been working here? Answer: Ever since they threatened to fire me. Well, it applies to some employees. Unfortunately, I seem to attract people who enjoy working, but now and then a few slugs will show up. Then the loss of face or job can be a good motivator for many. That said, it will always work against you to demoralize your employee in any way. I can be tough, but most people will admit I am fair. You can crush people if you don't weigh your words carefully. Your power as a leader should be used in most positive way, which sometimes call for a great deal of restraint as well as patience. I have to laugh when I hear people say, "I can't wait until I am the big shot so I can order everyone around." It doesn't quite work that way. Abraham Lincoln made an appropriate remark that is pertinent to management. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Keep your door open. I'm always taken aback when people say, "Oh, he's got it made," as if that's the end of the conversation about a person. They seem to be saying that the person can just check out and coast because he's already arrived. To me, arriving means something is about to begin. Graduation from college is a beginning, not an ending. Each success is a beginning of the next one. Learning is a new beginning we can give ourselves every day. A know-it-all is like a closed door. Everyone who knows me knows I keep my door to my office open. It's symbolic of the way I choose to think, and it's the way I operate. My father was much the same. He once said to me, "You know, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know." I think that has kept me young at heart more than anything else. It was an offhand comment, a quiet realization he mentioned to me one day while he was reading, but it has stuck with me for decades. Every day is a reminder to me of how much I don't know. Everything I learn leads me to something else I didn't know. Fortunately, I don't pride myself on being a know-it-all, so every day becomes a new challenge. People ask me what keeps me going, and this is probably the closest answer to the truth. If I end the day without knowing more than I did when I woke up, it makes me wonder, what did I miss out on today? Am I getting lazy? Am I a disciplined person? And this thought alone can get me going. Looking for a raise? Come on in. We have all heard the phrase creature of habit. That can be good or bad depending on your habits. I have cultivated the learning habits over the years, and it is one of the most pleasurable aspects of my life. Everyone in my family knows I am a big on education, not just Ivy League education but all education and for people of all ages. That also applies to me, and while I got very good grades at school, I do not have time to be a scholar. Still, it's something I aspire to in my quiet time. Possibilities unfold, the world opens up. My sister Marianne introduced me to the writings of Aldous Huxley. He was such a learner that when he faced it with a near total blindness as a young man, he learned Braille and continued his studies anyway. His description of this predicament had not a trace of self pity. In fact, he mentioned that it had offered some benefits. He could now read in a bed at night and his hands would never get colds because he could read with his hands under the covers. Learning begets learning. I would rather be stimulated than passive. You can't wear a blindfold in business. A regular part of your day should be devoted to expanding your horizons. We live in a big world and it is important for us to be aware of cultures other than our own. I have always lived in the United States, but I make an effort to be informed about other cultures. That's easy to do in New York City, the most diverse and exciting place on earth. Someone who had been living abroad for a few years told me upon returning home that a frequent comment about Americans is that you always know exactly where we are coming from. The flip side of this is that we rarely know where anyone else is coming from. We are very much up to the snuff about our own national events, but we are all less aware of what's happening in other countries. All of us need to pay more attention to events outside our own realm. We are connected to each other in so many ways, politically, commercially, socially. Perhaps one of the reasons I have been able to sell and rent apartments to the people of so many foreign nationalities is that I have made an effort to understand where they are coming from. Learn something new, whether you think you are interested in it or not. That's the opposite of having a closed mind or a closed door. I can thank my father for the example he set. It was the key to his remaining young and dynamic into his 90s. I can do the same for you if you make the effort. Think big and live large. This is the final rule of the Donald J. Trump School of Business and Management. Once you have mastered it, you are ready to graduate. It's a big world. There is a lot we don't know, which means there is still a lot to be discovered and a lot to be accomplished. The possibilities are always there. If you are thinking too small, you might miss them. In some ways, it's easier to buy a skyscraper than a small house in a bad section of the Brooklyn. Either way, you will probably need financing, and most people would rather invest in a great building than a dilapidated duplex on a dangerous street. With a skyscraper, if you hit, at least you big hit. And if you don't hit, what's the difference between losing $1 lakh or hundreds of millions of dollars? Either way, you have lost, so you might as well have really gone for it. I have read stories in which I am described as a cartoon, a comic book version of the big city business mogul with a gorgeous girlfriend and a private plane and the personal golf course and the penthouse apartment with marble floors and gold bathroom fixtures. But my cartoon is real. I am the creator of my own comic book and I love living in it. If you are going to think big. If you are going to live large. Part 2. Your personal apprenticeship. Career advice from the Donald. Take control of the job interview. I have had some interesting experiences with job interviews. Over the years, Norma Foydrer is a good example. I wasn't too sure about her after her first interview. It had nothing to do with her skills, but she seemed a little too prim as she belonged on some family sitcom as the ever so proper type. I don't think she could handle it here or that she would fit with my style. Norma persisted, seeming to recognize a good match better than I did. Little did I know how deceptive first impressions could be. Norma was actually as far fluff as you could get, so I thought, okay, maybe. Her abilities were superior to those of anyone else I had seen. As it turned out, I called her back on the same day her mother died, but Norma gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. She would work for me for 1 month at a low salary just to see whether we clicked. No strings attached. I thought, aha, she will never last anyway, and I can decide on someone else in the meantime. After 1 month with me, she would be out here for sure. The hoity toity type just won't fly, except out the front door. Needless to say, I underestimated Norma completely. I was duly humbled and I must add grateful for being so. She was persistent and committed to getting the job, and she did it with elegance.